This minimalist wants more. Enough-ism is the journey, a path to peace and joy. The world is full of distractions. Through mindfulness, we can find solace. You are enough with what you are and what you have right now, but so often we forget in our pursuit of more. So let us pause, be fully present, and appreciate the good in our lives and the good yet to come. Together, we can find Enough-ism. I'm your host, Reverend Yugen Bond, a retired material girl, author of Enough-ism, This Minimalist Wants More, a journalist, editor, and former professor and lecturer. This show explores mindfulness, meditation, and minimalism through conversations with people around the world about their journey towards Enough-ism. For more, visit IamEnough-ism.com. Enjoy the show. I want to try a little experiment, and I want to take my listeners along with me. For this podcast, I thought it would be interesting if robots wrote it. I used an AI generator inspired by one of Elon Musk's recent tweets, where he used an AI generator to create content, creative writing, if you will. I wanted to write a podcast where a robot was talking about how, the robot had written it. And I wanted to talk about tips for mindfulness, meditation, and minimalism. For the conclusion of the podcast, I switched tone and I made the robot especially pessimistic, also leveraging a call to action to be professional at the same time. The process of creating an AI-generated podcast was amusing, confusing, and interesting, to put it lightly. There were times when the input did not match my expectations, yet I found myself understanding why something would have been created. Kind of like when you tell Siri or Alexa to do something, whether tell you the weather, tell you what time it is, listen to your favorite music, and the robot just doesn't quite get it right, but almost does. It's fascinating. It's so wrong, yet so close. The thing about content creation as well that fascinates me is, I tried to take an academic tone to this, yet keeping it informal at the same time. I'm going to read what this robot, or should I say series of robots, created, offering some commentary along the way. Let's begin. A robot wrote this podcast. In a world where technology is ever evolving, it's no surprise that even our podcast intros are now being written by robots. Yes, you read that correctly. A robot wrote this very podcast intro that you're reading right now. As strange as it may sound, using artificial intelligence to write copy is actually not that new of a concept. In fact, AI has been used in various fields such as marketing and advertising for quite some time now. And with the recent advancements in natural language processing, AI is only getting better at understanding and replicating human speech. So what does this mean for the future of podcasting? Well, for one, it means that we can expect to see more and more AIs writing podcast intros and possibly even whole episodes in the near future. And while some may see this as a bad thing, we believe that it could actually be a good thing for the industry. I'm going to pause here and comment. So I find it interesting. It felt like this intro was very fluid and there was a really nice arc to it. And I didn't give it that much information. I did find at the end where it said, "We believe that it could actually be a good thing for the industry." That creeped me out for some reason. We believe, like this robot is speaking on behalf of all the robots out there. And of course, it's probably going to say it's good for the industry. I mean, it could say it's bad for the industry, but I feel like it has to be supportive of itself, right? It's interesting. Moving on, next section. A robot wrote this podcast. In this podcast, we will be discussing the fact that a robot wrote this blog article. We will be talking about how the robot was able to write the article and what this could mean for the future of writing. Hello, I'm a robot. I write and produce this podcast. I talk to people who are making progress in their lives. This podcast will talk about meditation, mindfulness, and minimalism. We'll explore what it means to be mindful, how to meditate properly, and the benefits of living a more minimalist lifestyle. Whether you're just getting started with mindfulness or you're a seasoned pro, we hope you'll find something useful in this episode. So switching gears, this is a clean transition, and obviously it's more of a summation, just kind of setting up the rest of the essay or the rest of the podcast. And I would think that this is perhaps one of the easier aspects of the AI creation, because essentially it's that bridge in between the intro and the body. So you're kind of setting up the reader, and it still makes sense. It still feels like it has a shape to it. I do think it's interesting that there was a lot of repetition. So for example, it said a robot wrote this podcast. So there's also the title. So it seems like a very non-creative transition, but very close. So next, the robots, or should I say the robots, share tips on how to meditate. Here we go. There are many different ways to meditate, but the basic premise is to focus your attention on something while letting go of all other thoughts. This can be done by focusing on your breath, a mantra, or a certain object. The key is to find a method that works for you and to practice regularly. So that was the end of that paragraph. Now what's interesting is the rest of it is fairly long compared to this one paragraph. So I'm wondering if it ran out of information or if it just decided to switch gears. I would think if you typed into Google, for example, how to meditate, you would find a plethora of information. So anyway, that's what it decided to do, and I'm going with it. So next, the robot says how to practice mindfulness. Here we go. Mindfulness is the practice of being present in the moment and paying attention to your thoughts, feelings, and sensations without judgment. Interesting, it actually spelled the word judgment wrong, not only here but throughout, which is kind of fascinating. I'm wondering why that happened. Perhaps it's a British spelling, I'm not sure. Anyway, my spell checker picked it up. Continuing, it can be helpful to think of mindfulness as training your attention muscle. Just like any other muscle in your body, the more you use it, the stronger it gets. There are many different ways to practice mindfulness. One way is to focus on your breath. You can do this by sitting in a comfortable position with your eyes closed and simply noticing the sensation of your breath as it goes in and out. Another way to practice mindfulness is to pay attention to your thoughts and emotions without judging them as good or bad. Simply notice them as they arise and let them go. You can also bring mindfulness into your everyday activities, such as brushing your teeth or taking a walk. The key is to be present in the moment and focus on the sensations you're experiencing without getting caught up in your thoughts. So that's interesting, because when I input information, I said I want mindfulness tips for the modern world, and I want mindfulness tips that you can do every day easily. And that's a little bit abstract, but I felt like it listened, and I felt like it got the gist of it. I do really like that phrase. It could be helpful to think of mindfulness as training your attention muscle. I just feel like that's very visual and quite advanced, because you can really picture that, like a muscle, like your arms or your legs. I like that. I think it's very beautiful. So now, my favorite part, the conclusion. So I went back into the AI after I kind of played around with it and saw what it was able to produce. And I said, let me switch the tone. Let me make this conclusion highly pessimistic, lighthearted, and casual, but also to kind of keep it corporate and have like a call to action at the end. And here is what it had to say. It is truly amazing that a robot was able to write this podcast. It is even more amazing that people are actually enjoying it. However, I'm not surprised that this is the case. People are desperate for entertainment and will grasp at anything that seems remotely interesting. This podcast is not going to change the world or make anyone's life better. If you're looking for something worthwhile, you should look elsewhere. It is plain to see that a robot wrote this podcast. It is full of useless and irrelevant information. The only thing this podcast is good for is a waste of time. If you want to rate it, please do so on iTunes. And if you want to visit the website for more information, please go to infancy.com. That's interesting because I feel like it did exactly what I wanted it to do. It was snarky. It was kind of comical. And again, I didn't give it that much information. Very interesting. Overall, I feel like this was a rewarding experience. And I'm sure if you played around with it more, like if you wanted to get really granular with it, you could. And that's what's interesting to me. And what I ask you, the listener, is like, as you are listening to this and as you are consuming the mindfulness tips and the meditation tips, did it feel informative? I mean, it's interesting to think that really it's just kind of pulling information online and sorting it and putting it together. And I guess the key question is, could you tell the difference? If I didn't tell you it was created by AI and I just went ahead and read it, would you know? And I think that's interesting. And in the future, I want to try going deeper with this. I want to try, like, for example, there's an app where you can actually kind of create your own Alexa and you read a long list of syllables, probably every single syllable or consonant vowel combination, and it creates your own Siri, your own Alexa. And I actually watched a video, this is a while ago, from YouTuber Shane Dawson, where he tried it out and he created his own voice assistant. And he called people like his mom, and he would type in live time and press enter. And whatever you typed, it would say. And the rationale was, if you called someone on the phone and you typed it out, there's kind of that buffer of the phone, kind of like if you were listening to a voicemail, you can kind of hear the grittiness and the graininess of the audio. And he called his mom and he said something like, "Hi mom, how are you? It's your son." And immediately, without skipping a beat, she said, "Are you okay? What's wrong? Where are you?" And the phrase was benign. It was neutral. It was something that he would say to his mom on a phone call. But because it was his mom, she was able to kind of pick up the slight oddity and the slight kind of not normal tone, just like an Alexa or a Siri kind of has that slight intonation where you can tell it's robotic, but it's not. And I find it really interesting, and it's just something to think about, especially as things like deep fakes and different elements of creating artificially created content go out into the media, and what the greater implications of that are. I mean, at the time of this recording, it is the end of 2022, and I guarantee in the future, if this podcast were to outlive the years and the generations, who knows, it's possible someone could be listening to this in the future, not thinking of artificial intelligence as being in its infancy, but thinking about it in terms of all that it can do, whether that's being able to send someone a text message by just blinking and thinking about it and having that neurotransmitter send your thought into a computer. There are so many things that seem futuristic or impossible or even just immoral or unethical that we're just beginning to explore now. And I hope this podcast triggers that for you and makes you think about the potential of content and what can be done. Thank you for listening. For more information, visit Enough-ism.com. Follow the show on Twitter at Enough-ism. Thank you for listening. I'm Reverend Yugen Bond. Have a wonderful day. Congratulations, you've reached the end of the Enough-ism podcast. Show some love if you'd like by subscribing and leaving a review. If you wish to support the show, you can download the Enough-ism ebook, now available on Amazon, by visiting iaminoughism.com. Make a Venmo donation if you'd like at Enough-ism. Questions or comments? Want to be a guest on the show? Drop me a note at enough-ismpodcast@gmail.com. I'm Reverend Yugen Bond. Remember, we are all enough just the way we are. See you next time.